Yes, thanks, Tina. So this is the second workshop on the new international economic order at 50. We're talking about the new international economic order that was passed at a special session of the United Nations on the 1st of May, 1974. Yesterday, we had a discussion with Vijay Prashad. Many of you were there. Welcome to this second meeting. It wasn't originally intended in this way, but we had to split it into two because of kind of time zones. So the idea of this today's round table, so yes, it is very much a round table in this peculiar square box called Zoom, is to kind of think about research on the new international economic order. And I'm very pleased that there are four friends and colleagues who have joined in this. And what we're going to do is we have a bit more time today. We have an hour and a half, so we'll finish at 11:30 Central European time, if that's okay with everyone. We might go over a little bit if people want it. It will be a round table, so I'll ask a couple of rounds of questions that will hopefully take us less than an hour. And then we'll leave the last 30 to 40 minutes for a much bigger discussion, which I think will hopefully not be so much question and answer, but a kind of thought experiment, since there are other people in the Zoom room who are also doing research or interested in research on the new international economic order. So that's the idea. It is being recorded, as was VJ's. So you will be able to listen back to this, and we even will try and produce a transcript. Okay. But I want to introduce in alphabetical order the four panelists. Chiara Bonfiglioli is Associate Professor of Contemporary History at Ca' Foscari University of Venice. She's the principal investigator of an ERC consolidator grant called Women and Non-Alignment in the Cold War Era, Biographical and Intersectional Perspectives. As all ERC projects have to have, it has this wonderful acronym, WONAM, and it runs until 2028. She previously taught gender and women's studies at University College Cork, and she's the author of Women and Industry in the Balkans, The Rise and Fall of the Yugoslav Textile Sector. Anna Kalori is a historian whose work focuses on the history of economic cooperation in the non-aligned movement. She's a lecturer in contemporary economic history at the School of Social and Political Sciences in the University of Glasgow. Before joining Glasgow, she was a Marie Curie co-fund postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Vienna. And Anna is part of an equally interesting and important collaborative research project titled UZAM, a socialist workplace in post-colonial Africa, funded by the Austrian Research Fund. Matthew Mabafam is a lecturer in development studies in the School of Social and Political Sciences in the University of Melbourne. His research contributes to decolonizing development epistemes, knowledge bases, and practices with a focus on Africa and the African diaspora. Matthew is currently co-editing a special issue of the journal Development in Practice to mark the 50th anniversary of the NIEO. And last but not least, Sam Nichols is a visiting research fellow at the University of Adelaide. So it's 10 o'clock in the morning because it's 6 p.m. in Australia. Sam wrote his PhD thesis, A Moment of Possibility, The Rise and Fall of the NIEO, which is available on the web, and I strongly recommend it, very much looking at debates within the G77. He's now updating the thesis with the goal of publication. So let me kind of begin, and we'll For the first question, we'll go in the same order. Can you each describe briefly your own interest in the NIEO and CERDS? I know some, obviously it's a direct interest, some have come across it through other work that you were doing, but also perhaps can you reflect on why there's been a massive increase in research in the NIEO recently? Surely it's not just because it's the 50th anniversary. And I wonder, Chiara, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Sorry for the slight delay this morning. And yeah, I'll start by saying I'm by no means an expert on the NIO. And even though I recently could witness an entire conference on it here at Ca' Foscari, which gave different perspectives on the economic, political, social implication, I came to this idea of the NIO through my own work on Yugoslav women's organizations and their interactions with other organizations of women in the global south, where they repeatedly refer to this idea of establishing a new international economic order as a way to also improve gender relations and women's emancipation in a let's say a holistic way, right? And we have to remember this mid-70s conjuncture is very interesting for women's and gender studies, for feminist history, because it's the moment in which we have, on the one hand, this encounter between the generation of women who have been at the helm of state socialist women's organization, often former partisans who retain this authority and who are about to retire, and the advent of a new generation of second wave feminists. Okay, so at this moment in the 70s, there is this encounter between, let's say, the old left approach to the women's question and this second wave that is stressing more the issues of such as sexuality, gender violence, and so on. And at the same time, this moment of high activism within the non-aligned movement and within the G77, it's also interacting with another phenomenon, which is the UN Decade for Women. At this point, we have, between 1975 and 1985, we have this UN Decade declared by the United Nations, and all countries have to produce a number of reports telling the world what they're doing to improve women's status. And this leads to a great production of knowledge on the issue of women's position, right? And so that's where I found some references, and multiple references to the NIO, coming from women such as Vida Tomšić, Nevenka Petrić. These were the leaders of official women's organizations in Yugoslavia, who were interacting with other women from the global south in settings such as UN conferences, but also, for instance, the International Planned Parenthood Federation. And often this reference was related to this idea of establishing women's emancipation, not on a feminist base. They were often critical of feminism. They saw it as bourgeois, but they proposed to solve women's issues in relation to other issues such as class and global inequalities and ethnicity. So that's where references to that kind of supported their position, right? We cannot think of women's emancipation unless we link it with the resolution of global geopolitical inequalities, class exploitation, exploitation of populations that are still under foreign occupation, apartheid, colonialism, and so on. And so that's how I sort of got interested into this concept. I think I'll stop here for now, and I come back to it later. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Anna, would you like to go next? And remember the second half of the question, why has there been such an explosion of interest recently?
Right, thank you. So maybe I'll start actually answering the second one, because I think it's a question that we kind of all grapple with, and I think it has quite a straightforward answer, at least from my side, also taken from what Vijay Prashad was discussing yesterday. There have been calls by a lot of somehow radical, if we want to use that word, experts, from economists to political scientists, for establishing a new international economic order, that is meant to revitalize multilateralism and South-South cooperation, particularly after or on the onset of the financial crisis of 2008, and even more so after the COVID pandemic and the kind of like resurfacing of questions of climate change. I think there's quite obviously a need to think about alternatives to what is visibly a neoliberal order that hasn't worked for a while. And so I think that the power of the NIEO and perhaps the attractiveness of it is because it presents an alternative, or actually a multiplicity of alternatives. So to me, that is the kind of the most visible reason why there has been, you know, such a kind of resurfacing of even the terminology of it. And so thinking about alternatives and the power that the NIEO has or had as, you know, this kind of symbol of ideas of how do we create alternative world orders is something that I think about quite a lot as part of my research. So in my work, I focus on the history of development and of technical and economic cooperation between non-aligned countries. And I look at it particularly from the perspective of enterprises as well as workers connected by different initiatives of what we can call Paul, we can have a separate conversation about this, alternative globalizations or alternative models of development. So I actually arrived at the NIEO, I think as much as Chiara, kind of tangentially through the histories that I was looking at, the history of cooperation within the non-aligned movement. And I'm interested in it because it seems that it's the outcome of actually bottom-up exchanges between socialist and developing economies that even of a bilateral nature feed into ideas and attempts at creating third-way paths to development and geopolitical alliances. So it's something that emerges from I would say, very much the bottom-up of these exchanges between companies and experts, which then feed into further up through government meetings, expert meetings, and then end up into discussions at the multilateral level. So the countries that I focus on, from Yugoslavia to Zambia to Italy, Cuba, Mexico, all feature into thinking about how themselves to fit within the NIEO and how to shape it. And so the NIEO is also something that crosses alliances and constraints of the Cold War, which for someone like myself, a historian of the non-aligned movement, is something that is quite interesting. So this is the first reason, I would say. And then if I have another minute, I'll just go into perhaps the second reason why I'm also interested in it. And it's more of a, I guess, more of a theoretical one. I'm interested in the theoretical potential of studying failures, quote unquote. So as historians, and not political scientists or economists or policymakers, I think we have the privilege of focusing on things that didn't work, and we can do this at length. And so we can discuss, you know, and I hope that through this workshop today, we can actually discuss the extent to which the NIEO worked or didn't work. But I think for myself, having studied market transition, privatization reforms, and workplace democracy in the post-socialist context, I'm acutely aware of the power of framing things as failure or not failure. And the NIEO somehow has a similar trajectory. And so uncovering the history of why it supposedly failed or didn't, I think is as important as uncovering what were the consequences of understanding it as something that failed or didn't. So I think those are the two reasons why I think I'm interested in it. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you. And I mean, I thought it was very interesting yesterday when Vijay Prashad was kind of saying, in a sense, it was assassinated before it even began, because most of us trace the demise to a different kind of time period. But I think this issue of haunting failure, unfailure is extraordinarily interesting. So thanks very much for that. Matthew, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would start with my motivation to actually engage with NIEO as a concept and practice. And I would actually say that in line with my own ideological inclination, I'm very much interested in how development is shaped from below and involving multiple actors in determining the kind of development that they actually want. And I see NIEO as an example of that because it was a group of individual states that came together to actually debate ideas that they thought could help engender development in the newly emerged economies. So directly linked to that is the idea of decolonization, which is central to my work and which is central to my heart as well. That with the current, or at the time with the structures that were in place, it would be difficult to actually engender development in those ways, in those contexts that the people who were arguing for it wanted. So I see NIEO as an attempt to decolonize economics from that point of view. And for me, it means a lot to actually have an alternative that is pushing to bring about development that is equitable, that is just, and that is fair. And on that principle, I think that NIEO had a kind of appeal for me. The second reason that I'm actually interested in NIEO is that as a development or critical development scholar, there has been a shift in the discipline towards the idea of contextualizing or looking at the role of context, culture, and its place in development. In that, there has been a huge criticism of development indicators as a measure of development, especially gross domestic product. There are a lot of inefficiencies that have been highlighted as that. So because of this, development scholars have shifted their attention from the economic aspect of things to focusing on other variables that are contextually situated. I think that bringing back economics into the picture is very important as economics intersects with these other variables. And we need economic understanding to be able to shape these other variables that they interrelate with. So based on that, I think that if we as development scholars do not critically look at international templates or frameworks that seeks to engender development, then we might be missing out. And it is important that we don't miss out. And I think the reason why there's a renewed interest in NIEO from our point of view is that the issues at the time of NIEO are also very prevalent today. And it brings back to the question, what has happened? Have we probably, and not probably, have we neglected the spirit of NIEO? And if we have neglected it and it has that appeal or that promise to be able to address, it's high time we went back to look at it and see some of the lessons that we can pick up to see how we can shape development that is fairer, that's equitable, and that's just. And here, I think that's why I think that there's new appeal. If you look across the globe, the inequality rates are getting bigger, wider and wider. People struggling to actually meet basic needs are getting wider and wider. And this is more pronounced in the so-called developing world. And I think for this reason, there's definitely the need for us to re-engage and see, even if we cannot replicate directly what NIEO looked like, there are some things in each spirit that we can pick up and see how we can inform going forward to bring about just development.
Super, thank you. Yeah, it does feel to me like a lot of the debates, even in the UN at that period, were kind of just before technocratization came. So, you know, that explosion of indicators and so on. So I think there's a lot of really, really important points there. Thank you. Sam, same question.
Well, I can remember clearly when I first learned about the new international economic order because I was in a hospital bed working as a lab rat for a medical trial for a global pharmaceutical company, which I needed to do at the time because I was about as poor as I am now, if I'm honest, but I needed the money. And I was reading Mark Mazower's Governing the World. And I come from a historical background where, to me, if a historian's saying it, it seems to make sense, but other times things don't actually seem to make sense to me. But quite liked Mark Mazower. And when I learnt about it, my thought was, how come I hadn't heard about this before? I mean, I'd studied international relations, politics, global history, even ethics of global justice and courses like that. And I hadn't heard about it. And so this idea that there was a serious attempt at reforming world order, global economics, and so on and so forth, and it came from the overwhelming majority of the world's leaders, it was fascinating to me. I needed to know more. And funnily enough, I think I share some similar interests with Anna as in regards to the history of it and how it's been discussed as a failure and that sort of thing. And one of the things when I started reading about it was just noticing some big claims about its failure and why it failed, which from my perspective weren't really backed up by, say, like archival evidence, although I am guilty of fetishizing the archives and that sort of thing. But that led me down a path of, trying to do what archival research I could from Australia and only being able to speak English and so on and so forth. But in any case, why it's relevant today, I think all the points raised get to it. There's economic uncertainty, trade wars, even stuff in Gaza potentially. There's parallels with things. So there's a lot there. It does seem to be like a similarity in terms of crisis at world level. The other thing, though, is in terms of when the NIEO was fading out and leaders of some states in the G77 were actually deciding to move away from it, that was this period where neoliberalism was becoming dominant, whereas now, even though it's still dominant, it doesn't have that idea of being this new solution to things anymore, which means all political projects, well, maybe there's some that I'm not aware of, but most political projects that I'm aware of have failed. So then it doesn't seem like such a failure when everything else has as well. So I wonder if that factors into things. And I'll leave it there.
Excellent, thank you. I mean, I should probably come clean. I'm not the disinterested moderator. I'm also, quite obsessed with the new international economic order. And I think for me, I came to it through the work on the non-aligned movement, because the non-aligned movement, its greatest influence was the early 70s in a sense, and Lusaka and then Algiers becomes that turn to the economic. But for me, why the NIEO is so fascinating is it's you using a Gramscian term. The 70s is that interregnum. An old order has died, but a new order has not been born. And I think, approaching it through what I would call conjunctural political economy, we're in a period now of a similar kind of interregnum, that we don't quite know what's going to emerge and what kinds of polycentric multilateralism will happen. I guess the world will be destroyed and the debate will be mute, but that also kind of focuses people's attention on it. So that was a really nice, rich array of discussion, of interest there. Let's move on to kind of like, what are the gaps in research? Research broadly defined. What themes are under-researched in relation to the NIEO and CERDS? What do we need to know more about, whoever we are? I suppose that's an epistemic community of researchers, right? And what are some of the unanswered questions or some of the unresolved debates? And I wonder, Anna, if you want to go first.
Sure, thank you. I mean, the list is potentially endless, as I think we are quite all aware here that the NIEO still, in the grand scheme of things, remains quite an under-researched topic and phenomenon. I think, first of all, I would say as historians that we know that, again, going back on the theme of failure, we know that only rarely things really fail and have no consequence. So it's quite rare that things end and after specific rupture moments. as much as it's quite rare that policies are abandoned with no consequence. So I think one question that I think needs further digging is the afterlives of the NIEO. What bearings did it have on development ideas in the Global South? Maybe we know that a little bit, but how has it concretely shaped, for example, South-South cooperation after it was abandoned? And, you know, where GATT first and the WTO later so impermeable to these ideas, or were there actual cross-contaminations that we haven't perhaps seen that much? And I think secondly, I would be interested in seeing, much like what Matthew was saying, actually, how these ideas were shaped from below. So what were the multiple actors that shaped ideas of the NIEO from the bottom up? And finally, I think the question that I have is what level of abstraction is needed to be able to compare different economic orders, which supposedly supplant each other. So in other words, you know, we kind of have this idea that the neoliberal order supplanted the NIO, which itself supplanted or aimed to supplant the Bretton Woods, though briefly. Was that sequence historically contingent, meaning that after that and before that, there weren't really similar cycles of orders substituting orders? So I think my question is also, you know, in terms of research that needs to be done, is what constitutes an order and what supplants it? Or in this kind of very beautiful image that you gave us of the interregnum, you know, where do orders die and where do orders where are new orders born? I guess that's the question I have.
Lovely, because it's clearly not a binary between order and disorder, right? It's there's lots of assemblages in between. Super. Sam, do you want to continue on the same line? What are the missing elements or the things we need to know more about?
Yeah, well, my particular interest is on just the decision making. What decisions were made by who? What options were available, which were considered but decided against? And that is a research question which would take potentially thousands of researchers in archives all around like it literally would require, and I'm getting to further things down the road of these questions, but it would probably require some kind of new information and communication order of integration, of collaboration or something to actually get to the bottom of it. But in any case, one decision making moment, which is in darker nations, is the idea of the debtors cartel. Now, whether or not that actually could have been enacted in the early 80s, it was proposed. And I find that interesting because within the Progressive International, there is a fair bit of talk about debtors cartels that has been coming out from their statements and things, which leads to another thing of decision-making in the present and future of how would you create a debtors cartel now? Like obviously then there was a point then when it was raised, I think, just to have a discussion about debt issues, and the US was pretty scared about that happening. So yeah, the idea of a debtors cartel and what that would entail, I think, is an interesting thing, but just in general, lots of decision-making is a gap.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, and I remember what Vijay said yesterday about the South Commission, like the report is much less interesting than the debates that were being had. And so we can maybe come on later to, you know, what sources there are and how we might do this. But the same question, please, Matthew, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I think for me, looking at the declaration itself and some of the works that have been done, there are more rooms for research to continue to see what happens and what we can do better. And one of the things that struck me most was that there was no mention of environmental issues in NIEO. And even though it did talk a lot about raw resource extraction and the usage of that, which is the cardinal point of the global order organization. So I think there's room there for us to look at how the usage of these raw materials impact on climate, impact on environment, taking into consideration that these issues are very topical and transcend across all geographies and impact on people, though the consequences may be different. And again, here, the global southern countries are likely to be the most impacted as a result of, not as a result of some of them inability to provide buffer or cushion to receive some of the shocks that they come as a result of that. So I think the environmental aspect of NIEO would be some area that I think it needs more research to find out. The second aspect, I think, is to actually re-engage with the key thinkers that inform NIEO to see that with the current terrain and with the issues that are emerging, to what extent are the ideas still very relevant? And if there were some of the ideas that we did not take into consideration, or we took them partially, taking into consideration that these issues are so very prevalent, it's time we re-engage with these ideas and see what we can learn to address some of the chronic issues that are so persistent. I think for me, the third point, or the third thing that I may suggest we look at is some of the global actors, such as the Bretton Woods institutions. We need to re-examine them and see structural changes that have been made or have not been made, which were recommended, and why or why not. In here, I'm not talking about internal structural changes that have happened, but structural changes that were demanded by NIEO as a way of bettering their relationship with these newly emerged economies. So these are some areas. There are more, but these are some of the things that I think that they need further research.
Excellent, thank you. Chiara, please.
Yeah, so, well, there are many levels, I think, that could be explored further. As Anna mentioned, I think one aspect will be definitely the topic of population control and family planning. So we could look into how, these debates about global inequalities at the economic level seeped into other dimensions and other themes. And recently I was looking into some of the reports about the Bucharest Conference, World Population Conference from 1974. And there was a fight there about the idea of development, and do we need to curb birth rates in the third world in order to achieve development because the resources are limited, or do we need a more holistic vision of development so that people will also have the capability to decide freely about childbirth and reproduction? And the Yugoslavs and the global South countries were firmly in the second camp. We could say, they were asking for a different vision of development, and said that then these decisions related to family planning compete to each single nation, and we cannot decide top down about birth rates. And on the other hand, there was this enormous pressure that's in the 60s and 70s from donors, especially Western donors, that wanted to promote all these sterilizations campaigns and birth control policies. So there is very much an interesting intersection, as there is when it comes to the idea of gender and development, because we have read the work of Christine Gozzi, Second Word, Second Sex, and how this, and also Jocelyn Olcott on the Mexico City conference, and this moment in which there is sort of a conflict between state socialist women's organization, Western feminist organization, women's organization from the global South. Somehow that is the last moment in which we have a kind of radical critique of feminism that is only focused on gender while leaving everything else out. And then this gender and development discourse in a way gets co-opted into neoliberalism and into technocracy. So I think this changes in discourse at the level of gender development would be really interesting. And also the contribution of women leaders and intellectuals. Yesterday, Vijay Prashad was talking about the Baki Jain and the South Commission, but I think there are many other actors and intellectuals who were really crucial into these debates, and also how did their position change through time? Their position didn't stay fixed. If we look at their biographies, how did they somehow move into the technocracy, we could say, by the 80s, right? Even somebody like Vida Tomšić started as a partisan communist politician in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and then in the 70s and 80s, she's this elderly delegate of Yugoslavia to all these UN congresses, and somehow she is part of this technocracy and global expertise networks, right? So how did that radicality that came from experiences such as anti-fascism, anti-colonialism, being part of communist and socialist parties somehow was incorporated and let's say depotentialized in the end of the 70s and 80s. And one of the other questions that came out of here at the conference in Venice was how radical was really the NIEO, right? Were there some left-wing critiques of the NIEO, and that I didn't know about, but like all this anti-developmentalist strand of thinkers such as Samir Amin and others, I mean, they were very critical of state developmentalism. So there again, okay, the NIO was seen as very radical by Western powers and multinational companies, but on the other hand, there were also left-wing critiques of this project. So maybe that is also an avenue that we want to explore further.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, Amin and Wallerstein were extraordinarily interesting because they were critical of the NIO at the time. And yet many of their ideas around dependency and around core periphery find their way into the NIO. So it's a bit like Anna's thing about it not being either or. This really complicated kind of, adaptation of some radical ideas. I had invited also Sue Onslow to be part of this panel, partly because I actually spent a month in the Commonwealth Archives in London, expecting to hate it, and found that the Commonwealth was also an extraordinarily interesting institution because Sonny Rampal from Guyana became head of the chief executive of the Commonwealth and brought the NIEO debates and some of the non-aligned movement debates into this. So I think what some of you said about looking at other places where NIEO was important. There's also a Yugoslav bit here, because I started to approach the NIEO because I wanted to be less Yugocentric in my work. And yet there's a huge amount to be done on the Yugoslav position in relation to the NIEO. They sometimes combined a degree of skepticism, particularly because it was perceived as an Algerian initiative without consultation, with a sometimes kind of weird mediating role where they would say to the British and the Americans, this doesn't have to be taken all together. So the complicated position of Yugoslavia's semi-peripheral role is something that would fascinate me more. But I also think Matthew and Chiara, this environment population set of issues is really important, because Matthew, Stockholm development, the Stockholm Conference on the Environment was before the NIO, and yet sometimes they look like parallel processes. You have to dig very deeply to find the kind of connections there. And and partly I think was it Indira Gandhi who said, poverty is the greatest polluter in her speech in Stockholm. And that was that kind of framed a lot of the Global South concern that environmentalism was just a new trick, really. So I think there's, lots of fascinating kind of issues and themes to develop. Matthew, before we come on to the next question, you're editing this special issue. Are there things in there that we really should be looking forward to?
Yes, there are a lot of things that I should be looking forward to. One, some of the thematic issues that I have raised are being overlooked. For example, there is a paper on environmental developmentalism that I think it would be great to contribute to this issue. I think there are other things that people are looking at things from different disciplinary point of views, which I think is super interesting, from history, from politics, from international relations, and this kind of stuff. And I think that would offer a lot of insights to this topic that, when it gets published, I will share for those who are interested.
And that's perfect. And I'm going to start with you. You're on my screen because I think the last set of questions for me is absolutely about, what might an interdisciplinary, even a post-disciplinary approach to the NIEO look like? And I think Sam hinted also at this. What innovative methodologies could we use? I think, multinodal research networks, big data, this kind of thing. So multidisciplinarity, innovation, and although this word gets so overused, I really do want to start with you, Matthew, on this. What steps need to be taken to decolonize research on the NIO and CERDS?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I would start with whether we need to be engaging with interdisciplinary research. And I would say yes, of course. We need that kind of interdisciplinary perspectives to unpack the issues from different point of views. And as I was saying, in the special issue that I'm editing with my colleague, Susan, those are some of the strengths that we are seeing, that people are contributing or looking at this particular issue from different point of view, which adds value to the analysis. But one of the people's work that I've come to enjoy a lot is Sami Amin. And one of the things that he noted in his analysis, that he was looking at it from historical, empirical point of view. And that gives a holistic picture of what was actually happening. So I do think that if people are positioned in different disciplines with different understanding of the issue, and they come together to engage in this kind of research, it will add a lot of value to the research that we are doing on this topic. I think in terms of innovation, there may be a need for different methodological approaches. And one of the ones that I would suggest is institutional ethnography, where when I talk about institutional ethnography, I'm looking at the works of World Bank, work of International Monetary Fund, where ethnographers based on anthropology can stay to study those organizations to actually understand them beyond the numbers or the technical stuff that we often get to hear from those things. And this would help us to get to understand the way they think about some of these issues and some of the changes that can be made that we would also be interested in. I think the issue of decolonizing development from that angle that we are looking at today is very important. And even though it is overused, I still think it's very relevant, because the issues that demand decolonization are still very present, are still very persistent. And that means that we need harder conversation on decolonization to actually dismantle that particular system in order to give ways to other ways of doing things. And in this, I think beyond a theoretical understanding, there's need for global North and global South academics or scholars to partner to actually see the correlation of their ideas and what some of these thinkers from the global South can offer in terms of decolonizing this particular topic that we are looking at. So I think in terms of approach, in terms of methodology, in terms of people that we work with, could actually lead to decolonizing this system.
Excellent. And if we have time, we can perhaps come back to some of the practical issues, because it sometimes feels to me global North, global South research collaborations actually mirror the inequalities of the NIO was addressing, right? So that's an issue, I think. Sam, same set of questions: interdisciplinarity, innovation, and decolonization.
Well, when I was looking at this question, I was thinking of the decolonizing research in terms of the proposals for the New World Information and Communication Order, because that was an attempt, I guess, to decolonize knowledge in a way that at the time was potentially going to help create the new international economic order, and vice versa. And that's also interesting, just for another weird interest of mine, just the history of the internet, because it comes, maybe the internet was a thing in the deep state or whatever, I'm not all on it, but before all this tech utopianism in the early 90s and sci-fi magazines, that the internet would also create a new international economic order, potentially, they might have said. But in the McBride report commissioned by UNESCO, they don't say the internet, but they talk about teleprocessing or telematics, and how links and relays between satellites could open up limitless possibilities of systemic integration. But unlike the tech utopians, they were also skeptical of what that might bring. They said that under present social structures, the poor and marginal groups may have no contact with this new era for a long time to come. Then, before I was a research fellow at the University of Adelaide, which was recent, I was looking into the New World Information Order, and there was an article on it. I couldn't actually get access to it. I wasn't at and I'm sure I'm part of the majority of the world who doesn't have access to these things, right? But I couldn't get it on Sci-Hub, I couldn't get it on LibGen, and I couldn't get it. So it's like, this is a real issue of just access to knowledge is a very basic issue. The thing that is interesting about that is, on a practical level, that means that academics as workers are actually in part of, like, in a very Cremata sense, neocolonialism as linked to monopolies and monopoly capitalism, because of these publishers being monopolies and so on and so forth. That means, even in a small way, academics could take practical measures to create a new world information order. And you see that with, there's a journal, I think it was called Neuroimage, and the editorial board just resigned because the publisher was charging the researchers way too much money to get open access. So they just resigned, started a non-profit open access journal. That, combined with Sci-Hub and stuff, in a way are moves from below for a new world information order, potentially, you could say. That's maybe a bit out there, but that's what I've been thinking about.
Yeah, I'm writing a chapter on precisely that, actually. And WICO, I mean, there's a text, Sasha will know very well, there's a text that UNESCO asked for, which ends up being published in 1985, where they really are prefiguring the kind of rise of a computer-mediated world and what kind of regulations might be needed there. So I think this was very prescient. Chiara, same set of questions.
Yeah, so like definitely interdisciplinary, post-disciplinary approaches are important. And when it comes to innovative methodologies, where I think, first of all, we should get out of this methodological nationalism at all costs and try to compare notes across different countries, across different archives. Yesterday, when Vijay was mentioning this archive that disappeared, my heart was sinking, and I was thinking, how do we preserve all these archives that are not as well preserved in countries beyond the global north, right? Because we know that archivization, even there is between, I don't know, the United States, where I did some research at the Schlesinger Library, and I don't know, the archives of Yugoslavia in Belgrade, there is an abyss of cataloging and archiving and allowing access to, allowing access to the researchers. So definitely trying to make these archives accessible to scholars in different countries. So now with my project, we are going to have 4 postdoctoral fellows that are going to see archives in India, Cuba, Egypt, Tunisia, and then try to digitalize some of this material. And if that is not possible, at least to write reports about those archives, what's available there, which kind of sources are there. And I was thinking of doing the same as well for the archives in Belgrade and the archives in Ljubljana, because there is so much that could be used as well by global scholars that is not, in the local languages, but it's in English, in French. So I think we really need to globalize a bit our thinking when it comes to historical research. I'm looking more at history and not looking so much at economics, but I think globalize and also intersectionalized, because one other risk, I believe, when we're looking at these interactions when it comes to leaders and intellectuals is to forget that they were also speaking to the local constituencies, right? And the NIEO was also a discourse that was used to foster certain agendas at home, and what were the agendas. And so I think we shouldn't forget when we're looking at this level of diplomats and leaders, that there were also actors at the local level and that they were interacting with, and so how did this agenda of the NIEO at the global level reflected on the domestic policies and welfare policies and gender policies? And so I think that's something to always keep in mind, that intersectional perspective, and not to assume that the global South leaders are radical per se, but also like what kind of differences were between the leaders and ordinary people in each of the countries. And I think that's something that is important to remember. And so I think intersectionality, biography is also, as I mentioned, very important in the project. We're going to look at certain biographies and also biographical material, autobiographies. I found extremely interesting these autobiographies. Vijay was mentioning the Vaki Jain, and she wrote a very interesting autobiography recently, The Brass Notebook, where she's talking about the South Commission and her work as a development economist. There are biographies such as the one of Veena Mazumdar, who wrote the report for the UN Decade for the Mexico City Conference, which was the first report done on the history of women's condition in India. She wrote this 700 pages report together with collaborators. And this report was very critical of Indira Gandhi and the emergency. So that's what I mean by looking at this microhistory and intersectionality and this kind of left-wing critique or bottom-up critique of certain agendas at the higher level. Yeah, sorry about my voice.
No, sorry, excellent. And I think this microhistory, institutional ethnography, but also then big data, because digitalization and actually translations now are a bit more possible. They're not perfect, but they're much better than they ever were. Anna, the same one for you. Sorry that you're going last. Someone has to.
Not a problem at all, and I'll keep it brief because I think my colleagues have kind of outlined much of the things that I was going to mention as well. I think particularly, as Chiara was saying, this kind of looking at the nexus between what happens at these at the kind of like the global level of these big multilateral organizations, and then how this filters through local contexts, but is also influenced by them. So I think also my sense, and again, I'm not a sociologist, so I don't know the extent to which something like actor network theory would work in this context, but I feel that particularly phenomena like the NIEO, I think lend themselves to thinking about actors and a multiplicity of actors, not just the ones that maybe sign the reports and so forth, and how they operate in these kind of networks. Just as an example, so I did an interview with a Mexican diplomat who was basically the reference point for Mexico's attempt at participating into the NIEO. And most of the interview was about his network and the network of people that he knew in Hungary and other people, and how he fed it through then back into the government of Echeverria, then how he kind of like, through his own personal connections at the UN and so forth. And I think obviously this is particularly relevant, I think, because the NIEO is something that happens in a context where networks are particularly important. So I think that is something that fascinates me, I think, in this. And the other thing that I would say in terms of maybe the methodological potentials and also further, perhaps less explored research questions, is to look at other parallels or parallel attempts at creating third ways. And so how then, from a disciplinary point of view, can we look at these historical moments in more creative ways? But I'll stop there.
Excellent. No, and I mean, I'm part of a group looking at non-aligned cultural exchange, trying to use network tools. I don't know whether Sanya is still here, but like looking at nodes and flows and networks of networks. And it does seem to me that would be an innovative technology. Look, we've exactly used an hour, so we're doing all right. I urge the people in the Zoom room, if you want to turn your camera on, feel free to do so. And we've got half an hour, and I'd be happy to do it like this. Of course, questions and comments, but if there are other people here who are doing research on or tangential to the NIEO, please also preface what you want to say with where you are in some of these questions. So the floor is open. Who wants to be first? So I see Sam has raised his hand. Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
Sorry, I just had a quick question for you, Anna. When you said the third way, could you just explain what you meant by that? Because I was a little bit like, you mean like third track diplomacy or just an alternative? Anyway, that's like just a question. I'm out of ignorance.
Sorry, yeah, I should have. Oh, Paul, sorry, are we collecting questions or should we go one by one?
We'll see, but let's answer that because I think it's
okay.
pretty straightforward.
Yeah, so in the 1970s in Europe, there was also an attempt to create something that was called Eurocommunism, right? So the idea of creating kind of like a third way path between what was considered Soviet communism, state planned and so forth, and state capitalism. And so that was, for example, a European attempt at creating kind of like a third way path in between the two. But that was not the only example. Countries like Libya or Egypt or Algeria also had ideas about essentially what could be an ideological and afterwards an economic and political project that would kind of like modernization and development that would not necessarily abide to or reproduce any of the two formats of the two blocks, essentially. I've oversimplified here, but I hope that's
It's not Tony Blair and Gerhard Schroeder. So I've got Borisha and then Patrick. Let's take both. Go ahead, Borisha.
Can you hear me? Yeah. First, thank you all for this great roundtable and talks. I really enjoyed. I cannot remember when I enjoyed more one Zoom meeting, really. I somehow have a little bit of comments on all what was said, and maybe I'll throw, as Paul suggested, a little bit of research that I'm working on that may somehow tangentially be connected to this. I've also, I mean, when it comes to new international economic order, I'm only literally, this is the most that I've learned about it now. When I was listening to I did read a little bit, and I knew Paul is doing something on this, but this was really super informative in terms of both how to historically and theoretically approach this, but also from this perspective that was somehow very present in all of the comments, and to my mind somehow also perfectly captures what I'm sort of trying to think through in terms of methodology, research. How do we approach all of these different sort of challenges that you were talking about? And this is like maybe a joke, but maybe in a part in a serious suggestion. I mean, it's somehow like I mean, Samuel in a way was talking about it, but he was talking about the new communication order or something like that. That this was his sort of a phrase, but I somehow now feel that some sort of new international research organization is needed. So, you know, like it's just like NIRO. I mean, if there's a sort of a at least partial agreement how a lot of efforts is needed, but also maybe something that was not somehow said. But I mean, of course, in answering Paul's question, why new international economic order now, and then Anna in a way said it, and I mean we all somehow for sure agree there is a a scream in the international world that something new needs to happen. I mean, Marxists and leftists and I don't know, anarchists and who not are saying this forever, but especially since 10 or 12 years or so. So I mean, it's just something. This new international research organization could actually be intervention within the spirit of this project somehow on behalf of us researchers to somehow find different ways, and then maybe have 1,000 researchers and I don't know what, servers in Iceland that are working only for us. But, like there are parts of this network that already exists outside of research world. And this, I think this point is, just to go back in terms of why it is important now, apart from what was already said, I mean, I think that this shows, at least to my mind, I wonder whether you would agree, but how historical research and history, and this what we are doing, has never been more important in a way, never more engaged in the present, as somehow the distance is there, but it doesn't really exist in terms of how political how is the conjuncture we are now in, as researchers, as people, as political beings, so there's this very strong political implication for the present moment, I think, in what all of you are doing, and maybe also some of us in some different terms. So this is just like a sort of an impression of all this and how it relates. I really love this proposal, institutional ethnography, and also this general agreement how, like new methodology, a new approach is needed somehow, and even post-disciplinary was said. And let me give you another sort of a joke, but sort of a also serious thinking. For some years, I've now been playing with this non-disciplined research, this additional sort of a twist where, non-disciplined is like a child that does not behave in a proper way. So, and for me, okay, let's try this also. It's somehow, like even a twist to so we don't have to, prove any. Once we have our new international research organization, we don't have to, justify ourselves with our methodology. This is ours, so, peep you, like whatever. So this is just another, I mean, maybe, yeah, like,
so Boris shall let 1,000 undisciplined researchers bloom
exactly.
Is what I get from
Non-disciplined research. Let them bloom. This is like for us teaching, for you teaching and not teaching, like your mission, a Socratic mission for your students, like to make them in the non-disciplined
Great.
research.
Look, I've got two more people, so let's take both, and then let's see if we've got time. Go on, quickly.
One little point that I wanted to add in terms of what is my research. Sorry for taking this time. I'm like, it was really super sort of stimulative for me, at least. Just one point, as Chiara said, very important, like not to have this, to leave this methodological nationalism, but at the same time, I think like, states as actors, as Anna was saying, still have to, like they were making, whoever they were, a new international order to, replace the old one that also somehow states established. So, I mean, this is where somehow research also needs to be, like steady, position. And I mean, you already said it in ways, but just to sort of point this to once more, and then just a little bit on my research, as I said, like, and it relates to institutional ethnography, but I'm also thinking like micro studies of institutions, study of micro institutions that different countries sort of with their own developmental projects and thinking were doing, and this is where my research comes in. I've been studying for past 2 years this institution of Yugoslav socialism, a very interesting and under-researched thing, almost non-research as I could find out so far, of so-called samodoprinos. I don't know if anybody's from knows what it means. It literally translated to English would mean contributions in terms of taxes and other things that we pay to a state. And in Yugoslavia, they had from the 46 up until 1990, they had this institution, a democratically decided self-taxing projects, to collect money for very specific designated projects in terms of development of infrastructure and public institutions. So something that, to my mind, this would be looking at development in real terms, in terms of, okay, we are trying to do something and we build these institutions and then we use them like this and like that. So it's some sort of very comparatively broad approach. Maybe could also be another thing to look at, how actual new different development projects were being made.
Super. And I think that really does, as several of the speakers said, this link between the micro and the macro, to use kind of old style jargon. But thanks very much, Boris. Look, I've got 2 more people, so I want to take those questions and then we might have time for another round, but I'll ask the panelists to respond to whatever they see fit. Patrick, you're next, and then Catherine.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for all the conversations, comments, and inspiring presentations. I'm going in the kind of opposite direction as the previous speaker. I think our research actually has never been less important in the history of social sciences, and I also really disagree with micro studies. So basically the new international economic order is just one step in a series of long climb downs of the defeat of socialism. If we look at some of the governments involved and Paul, we discussed this last year at Historical Materialism London when we had a roundtable on the NIEO, and in my own research on the global history of special economic zones, I've looked at different countries involved in the NIEO. I've looked at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization that was really central to the NIEO. And you see here that this is really already a lost cause when it starts. So, for example, Indonesia already has like a kind of semi-fascist government since 1965. Never really. I mean, Sukarno was also a collaborator of the Japanese, so Indonesia was never a really communist state, and certainly not at the Bandung conference moment when it was very Islamist focused already. And most of these governments involved in the non-aligned movement, I've pointed that out in the last 10, 15 years in several publications, have already, for example, several export processing zones, special economic zones, and so on going. So we see that the kind of neoliberal counter-revolution has already taken hold in most of these governments. We also see that in the kind of UNIDO, which is the spearhead organization of industrial development. And the other point is that we see, and that's what I've pointed out in my research, that these micro studies really are one of the kind of main Trojan horses of the neoliberal counter-revolution, where you kind of really, in a classical Geertzian, and it's no coincidence that Geertz studied Indonesia, and that he never said anything about the butcher of communists, and then kind of published this horrible essay on the Balinese cockfight, when the cockfight is actually about killing communists, more or less, and there's no word about it, or the kind of symbolic of this blood running across the street. So in my research, I really can point out that by kind of then designing questionnaires, micro studies, and so on, There's a kind of movement or momentum to create a voice, for example, that everybody wants these export processing zones. Yeah, and this is because the macro perspective is deliberately ignored. And this is why it's no coincidence that the only kind of proper leftist critics are not only Armin and Wallerstein, but also other kind of the few leftist governments that are left in the 70s. And we shouldn't forget also that, like, I mean, in 74, the Viet Cong was still kind of at least trying to kill American, Canadian imperialists, but also troops from the Philippines, from South Korea, that were also active in the Vietnam War. Yeah, so we have a lot of NAM governments sending troops to Vietnam and to other of these kind of neo-imperialist ventures. I won't go on further. Sorry to be so sharp, but I wanted to hammer these points home. Thank you very much. I think the research is super important. Just don't fall into the micro studies trap. I know we all need to do it because we want research money, but otherwise it's a real project.
Excellent, Patrick. Thank you. I mean, I think we need another hour and a half to convince you that actually those micro studies and that bigger conjunctural political economy can actually work together.
At 11 in another building, so sorry.
Right. So we'll do it another time. But thanks very much for that, Catherine. It's great to see you. Please.
Yeah, this comment won't be on such a macro level as the last one. Sorry. I think I'm somebody else my way who was sitting here thinking we need a new international information order. So thanks to everyone who's already discussed that. My question is a much more kind of practical, methodological one, and it goes back to something I think might have been Chiara said about how much material there is in the Yugoslav archives, for instance, that scholars of places that are not Yugoslavia or connected directly to Yugoslavia might still be able to use, but they don't know they're there. So what can we do to, draw more attention to what's there?
Okay, that's a very practical and important question. So I don't see anyone else. I don't see anything in the chat. So let's go to the panel and pick what you want. But let's start with Chiara, because I think the archive question is a really important one. And I do know that there's been talk about digitalizing the archive, Yugoslavia archive, since I was going there and probably from before, and also, making it easier to get into the diplomatic archive and all of these things. There are institutional constraints on some of these things, but maybe you have some idea how to respond to.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. I'm not sure if I have an important solution, but I just last time I was there, I saw, like, for instance, all communication with Egyptian women's organization was in French, and all communication with Cuba, there was most of it was in Spanish. I mean, there were translations of Croatian, but there was a lot in Spanish. So I think with French, Spanish, and English, it's very possible to look at a number of those files, and also other material that I found that was very interesting was from this Women's International Democratic Federation that, as you know, was this global organization for women. It was considered pro-Soviet, but then it kind of opened up to the third world and it became more plural. And even the Yugoslav delegates recognized that it was more, by the 70s, it was very much of an open organization. And we don't know where the material went from the headquarters in East Berlin. So a number of this material from this Congress is scattered in Sophia Smith collection in Northampton and in other places. In some is in the Amsterdam Institute for Social History in Amsterdam. They have the collection of women of the whole world from the WIDF. So with the project now, we are digitalizing that whole collection, and hopefully we can make it available to other researchers, because I think that's the most complete collection. But what I was trying to say is that there is material that is not directly related only to Yugoslavia. There's also material related to other organizations. And I think, I was thinking of writing maybe a report or some directions for other scholars and students. And I think maybe this is something we should all aim to do if we go to a certain archive, or one that is not as known as the Western one, and write a bit of a guide, because often there's also an issue of how to use these fighting aids that are there, that have been written maybe 30 years ago and nobody ever updated them. And so maybe, yeah, that's just a suggestion that and we could maybe collectivize this archival knowledge, because as we know, it takes time and money to go to the archive, and not everybody is able to do it all the time. So that would massively help people in their research. That's just a suggestion.
Excellent. If there's no one else outside of the panel, let's go one by one and have some reflections on the comments that we've heard. Sam, perhaps you'd like to go first.
Sure. So on to what you were saying about the NIEO being seen as part of this decline. Yeah, I think that's in Darker Nations. I think Vijay Prashad does a pretty good job of that, looking at like internal class contradictions, first wave of non-aligned movement. And there's actually, like, this is one area where I think there's some cool research. There's even Mecca of Revolution by Jeffrey Byrne. Terrible reading, but that talks about in Algeria and a coup that got Boumediene. Christy Thornton stuff on Mexico even gets into some of these issues. But also, that's another thing that's come up in these progressive international discussions about a new international economic order. And Yanis Varoufakis, he goes pretty far, saying like, we should not rely on state capitalists. If we do, it will fail. It must be from below. And even mentions the new international economic order will be built from workers' control of factories, which then connects to some of Anna's work, actually. So that is actually interesting. Like, that whole thing that you said is actually kind of interesting. So that's all I'll say.
Thanks very much. Anna.
Yeah, I think, yeah, Chiara already kind of outlined what I think is necessary for archives, as much as it's possible to digitalize or even write guides, or if, often research in archives are dependent on, again, sorry to continue with this, but are dependent on networks and on the kind of personal relations that we have with the archivists. And I see that sometimes in some of these archives, at least as kind of like maybe a new generation of archivists that are very much willing. And so if, besides, thinking about how to digitalize and make these copies available wherever possible, I think another way could also be that of trying to think about what kind of institutional support can come from our side for some of these young archivists to maybe help us and write themselves the guides or kind of like smaller reports about what's available in what language, as I think they are the ones that actually have most of the knowledge on this. So I've found that that is the thing that actually has helped me the most, is literally talking to someone at the archive. So if there are any kind of like institutional supports that we can provide, I think that would go also quite a long way. I'm also aware, having done, well, actually, no, I mean, the only example that I have personally is from the archives in Zambia. And I think understandably, archivists there were quite protective of the material that they had. And in particular, were quite, how can I say, not necessarily openly resisting, but they were quite acutely aware of the fact of kind of like not letting any kind of like extractive research approaches to kind of like so I think it's a difficult balance in that, and I think that is where, you know, having projects that try and connect researchers from different parts of the world is important, even though sometimes, as our experience was, that even with local researchers, sometimes this understanding of still you're working for a university elsewhere and you're being extractive still happens. So I think there's also kind of like a need to think about how to frame these projects in a way that they don't incur in these kind of difficulties. And I guess I'll stop here for now. But I would be happy to think about more why the environment is not in the NIEO later on if we have time, because I think it's quite an exciting question.
Excellent. So do I. Matthew, please.
Yeah, thank you. I just think I'm happy that I'm part of this conversation and to hear my co-panelists give different perspectives, but two contributions from Patrick and Borisa. Thank you so much for your contribution. And I think we need contributions like that to push us to think. Especially the comment Patrick made that you were not in support of micro studies. I'm just thinking I've done a bit of micro studies in context, contextualizing it in local areas, and what that means going forward. It will really push me to rethink. And I think things like that would help us to become more innovative and see how we can deepen our intellectual commitment. Yeah.
Excellent. Anna, do you want to come back to the environmental question?
Yeah, I think it's a very, very interesting one. And I don't, this is kind of like all hypotheses that I have. So I would be very happy to talk to Matthew more or anyone who has more knowledge about it. My sense is that, and it's more of a question than, you know, than an argument, but I wonder if, you know, part of the reasons for it is that the NIEO is essentially something that comes arguably out of UNCTAD, right? So arguably still out of an idea that progress is modernization, modernization is industrialization and growth. And so forget about whatever kind of limits that. And in parallel to that, I think that is also a time where, you know, the Club of Rome publishes the Limits to Growth, which is something that has kind of a lot of pizzazz, but that quickly becomes criticized in the scientific world because it's not very, you know, statistically sound. Its economic kind of groundings are not particularly well received or appreciated in the world of science. So I wonder if that's also part of it, in the sense that, like, you know, oh, you see, like this whole initiative is showing that we need to think about the environment, but are they? Because they're not really. That this report is not very convincing, I guess, to a lot of the people who were thinking about the NIEO. So I wonder if there's you know, if there are other elements here. There's also, I think, the UN Environment Agency, the one that is now in Nairobi.
Nairobi, yeah.
It was kind of born around the same time. So I wonder if it seems to me that like the UN often operates in this kind of like very siloed way. So, you know, this is the organization that does environment, and forget about diluting these arguments with that, because they are doing that and NIEO is doing something else. So I wonder if there's also, it is also an outcome of thinking in terms of silos in a way.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I'll send you the chapter that I'm grappling with, precisely this, because for me, what's extraordinary about this work, and Sasha, you might want to join in, like, because I'm now writing something on the New World Information Communications Orders. This still was a time when actually going to a seminar or a workshop actually mattered. You know, there weren't millions of them. So like in preparation for Stockholm, Maurice Strong, who was going to be the coordinator, realized that the Global South were really, really not buying into this for obvious reasons. And there was a seminar in a town in Switzerland, Faunex, I don't know how you pronounce it, where Mohammed Al-Haq, Giovanni Correa, so developmentalist economists, not environmentalists, which is also interesting, but we're really trying to kind of link environment and a kind of Southern perspective on developmentalism. The leap then is to Stockholm, where this didn't, it wasn't completely reflected in the way things came out. And then, of course, the decision to place the UN Environmental Agency in Nairobi was actually also kind of deeply contradictory. But I actually think, an age when 16 people meeting together in a workshop actually did make a difference. I think it relates to Vijay's comments yesterday on the South Commission is an extraordinarily interesting thing. And somebody made the point that environmentalism at that moment was an open field. It only later became very much kind of siloed. But I think it's a lot of this is also about UN agencies, right? Like I wrote about UNESCO and UNCTAD. Are you an advocate for the Global South? Are you a global mediator? And actually how you resolve that contradiction is to become a technocratic organization that creates indicators in some ways. Sorry, I abused the chair's privilege there. Who wants the last word? So I'll have the last word. I mean, I actually think that maybe many of us have struggled with the non-aligned movement as multinodal, and you go to other countries and people are not as interested in the non-aligned movement as they are in the kind of post-Yugoslav space, or those of us who kind of primarily work on Yugoslavia. I think, the new international economic order is a more decentered, albeit statist, kind of placeholder for some of this more, I'm rephrasing what you said, Anna, probably be stretching it too far, but, multinodal and non-extractive, this idea of actually how we might think about grassroots meets elite and transnational networks kind of come in would be the kind of thing we can do. Look, I hope this has been an interesting and useful event for people. I'm very encouraged by the kind of exchanges that we had, and I hope that taking Boris's idea that there used to be every meeting where we agreed to form our own network. I'm not suggesting that, but I do think like having some of these loosely scripted conversations with people who are working on a range of issues would be really good in the future. So thanks to the panelists, to Chiara, to Matthew, to Anna, and to Sam. Thanks for the questions and the conversations. This will be recorded and made available. So I do want to thank Tina and Sanya from the Center for Advanced Studies in the University of Rijeka for making this possible. And we'll see each other in some fora in the future, I think. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul, and thanks everyone. This was exciting to meet all of you, and thanks for the questions.
Thanks. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.